My friends and I were introduced to what is, for my money, the best story in all of gaming across all categories, including video games, at a local gaming convention by a couple guys named Anu and Brandon. We had met these guys at this local con in Los Angeles in the mid-90s. This was, I think, the first con my friends and I went to. And if you've never been to a local gaming convention, I really recommend it because you get to meet new cool people who live near you. And so, like, we would hang out with these guys for months afterwards, and you get to play new games that you would never otherwise get to play, including games that you really only can play at conventions, for which, stay tuned. We'd been hanging out with these guys for a couple of hours. They were super cool. We were having dinner, and Anu said, don't forget to go to the AEG booth and get a copy of the L5R promo card, because you may only be able to get it at this convention. We all looked at him and went, what? Blink, blink. We had no idea what he was talking about. We had never even really heard of Legend of the Five Rings. And he got this look on his face, which I'll never forget, because he realized, even though he didn't know us well, he'd only known us for a couple of hours, he realized he was about to introduce us to something that we were going to become obsessed with. And he was completely correct. And he introduced us to it in what I think of as a very effectively dramatic way. He really hooked us. He took the promo card out of his pocket and showed it to us. And this is it. This is the promo card my friend Anu used to hook us on this game. And it's somewhat hard to decipher. I think the graphic design was done by an illustrator rather than a graphic designer. But it was a very young company. I mean, everybody at this company was in their 20s, maybe their early 30s. This is a collectible card game, which were huge at the time. And these card games, like games like Legend of the Five Rings, is orders of magnitude more complex than anything out now. Magic the Gathering was only a year or two old, and folks didn't yet know. Is it a complex game? Is it a simple game? Because it was the only one. And the assumption was, since it's the first one, it must be relatively straightforward. Any new game is going to have to be more complex. Nobody thinks that way anymore, for which see Hearthstone, but that's how they used to think. And this game is incredibly complex. And you can tell just by reading the card. Reading this card actually tells you an awful lot about the game. It's a great way to hook a player. It says that this person is a Scorpion Clan deceiver. And so right out of the gate, you know that there are different clans, and one of them is the Scorpion Clan. Also, he is a samurai. So now you know that this is in some kind of fantasy medieval feudal Japan. If you keep reading, it says that he will not join a Crane Clan player. So now you know that there's a Crane Clan, which is cool, and that they are in opposition to the Scorpion Clan, right? We're only like 2 sentences into this card, and we already know a lot. There's a lot of drama just in this one card. The Scorpion Clan deceiver who will not join the Crane Clan. And also, you can activate him and cause all Crane players to lose 2 honor. And now you know something else about Legend of the Five Rings, something very important about Legend of the Five Rings, that it is a game about honor. But I haven't gotten to the weirdest part, and the part that actually did hook us, and that is the first text on the card, which says that this card counts as the egg of Panku for uniqueness purposes, which was complete gibberish to my friends and I, and we said so. We're like, is this English? What is going on in this card? And Anu's like, okay. And he had to rewind the clock and explain what was going on in this game that hooked us and caused it to be what I consider to be the best story ever in any game. That's because this card exists only as a result of what happened in what they called a storyline tournament. They would have tournaments at local game stores across the country. At one of these local game stores, this official sponsored tournament, promoted as a storyline tournament, in the final round, a Scorpion player faced off against a Crane player. Now remember, my friends and I really have no idea how to play this game yet. Anu was telling us the story. And in this final round of the storyline tournament, the Crane Clan player plays this card, Doji Hoturi. Doji Hoturi is the Crane Clan champion. He's also the greatest duelist in the Empire. Which means when you play this card, it means you're going to try to win by dueling. That's win by honor is what it's called. You get to a certain amount of honor and you win the game. And an easy way to do that is by dueling other characters. So this is the greatest duelist in the Empire. It's going to be hard to beat this guy. You better have another way to win besides honor, because now it's going to be a race between whatever victory condition you're going to try and use and this player trying to win by honor. Well, the Scorpion Clan player used the Crane Clan's strength against it by playing this card, the Egg of Panku. Panku is a dragon, and its egg allows you, when you play it, to copy another character in the game. So the Scorpion Clan player plays the Egg of Panku and copies Doji Hoturi. Now the Scorpion Clan player also has the best duelist in the Empire, and they're on equal footing, and the Scorpion Clan player then proceeded to win. He won the tournament. He beat the Crane Clan with a magical copy of the Crane Clan's champion. And the guys at AEG, the folks making the game, then wove that into not just the story, but the actual game mechanics. They introduced a card. This is Bayushi Kachiko. She's the Scorpion Clan seductress and goes on to become one of the most important characters in the game. And there's this great tragic love affair between her and Doji Hotori. Tragic is technically true, I guess, but doomed is probably a better way of putting it, because Doji Hotori is married and Bayushi Kachiko is not his wife, and he falls in love with her. And she is a seductress. Evil is too simplistic a word for it, which you discover as you play this game and the story reveals itself. And that's another part of the story, is that it's not just about the rise and fall of empires. It's not just about honor. It's also about love. Great love affairs happened in the context of this game. The way the folks at AEG had the story play out as a result of what happened at this game store was they had Bayushi Kachiko, the Scorpion Clan seductress, poison Doji Hotori, her lover, right? She seduces him, gets him to come into her tent, and then she poisons him. And while he's drugged and insensible, she uses the egg of Panku to clone him. And then she sends the clone of Doji Hotori out into the world to do dishonorable things, thereby bringing dishonor upon the Crane clan, which was a whole part. The Crane clan falls. They become a dishonored clan in the game. Their game mechanics change, all as a result of something that happened at a local game store in a storyline tournament. In other words, in a way that really no other game I've played has done, the players had control of the story in Legend of the Five Rings. And it was a hell of a story. I mean, it was epic. It took place over 3 years. And, the next time my friends and I were at a local gaming convention, of course, AEG was there. They were a local game company, so we would see them all the time. And they had promised everybody that the story of Legend of the Five Rings, which that was called the Clan War, and it started in 1995 when the first game was released. Each expansion that came out revealed more of the story. The game mechanics changed, all to reflect the things that people were doing at tournaments in play. And they promised their players that this storyline, the Clan War, in which there were 6 great clans vying to see who would become the next emperor, because the emperor, Hantai the 38th, was poisoned and dying. Poisoned actually by Bayushi Kachiko. She goes around doing a lot of that. They promised everyone that the storyline of the Clan War would resolve, and the game, Legend of the Five Rings, would end at Gen Con 1997. They called it the Day of Thunder. So the game's going to came out in 1995. It gets an expansion every quarter or thereabouts. Each expansion advances the plot based on the things the players were doing in play. And this competition between these great clans to see who would become the next emperor would resolve. And keep in mind, there were dozens of story threads woven throughout this game that they played over the course of 2 years. And it would all resolve at Gen Con 1997, at which point they would close the doors on Legend of the Five Rings, and it would become a complete thing. It would be done. I confronted the owner of AEG, John Zinzer. I didn't know who the guy was. He was selling cards at his booth at a local game convention, just like any other employee. But this game had become a huge phenomenon in gaming and is now, I think, largely forgotten, which is, I think, a crime. And it was huge. This game was huge. It's making tons of money. My friends and I are now hooked, and we're spending tons of money on it. And I said, there's no way you're going to end this game at Gen Con 1997. And he goes, no, we are absolutely there's going to be a final expansion, and that's going to be it. We'll move on. We'll make another game, maybe set in the same world in a different part of the world, but that's going to be it. This is a game with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I was like, no, you're not going to do that. This game, this is literally what I said to him. This game is paying for your BMW. You're not going to just mop all the whole thing. And he laughed and he said, no, that's exactly what we're going to do. And I would occasionally get to meet John Zinzer later in my career. I can't really say that I know him, but my sense of him is that he absolutely meant that in that moment. These were the stakes. This is what made the story of L5R meaningful to the people playing in it, was that they knew, or they believed, that the game would end. And that they would determine the story. The players in the game would determine the story of this game. And then from that moment forward, it would be history and the game would be over. This game had thousands of cards released for it over the 2 years between release and the Day of Thunder. And those cards were one of the only ways to know what was going on in the story. You had to talk to people. They never wrote it down anywhere. They would fictionalize it. They had a fan club, an official fan club you would join, and you would pick what clan that you served. That was another cool thing I loved about the game, is when you bought the game, you could, it's like playing Hearthstone, and you can pick any character you want to play, but imagine identifying yourself uniquely with one character or class or faction. That's how you played L5R. You would send off your box tops or whatever and say, I am a Crane Clan player. And then from that point forward, like every quarter, you would get a newsletter, a printed newsletter mailed to your house that had the events from the previous quarter retold from your clan's point of view. So Crane Clan players got a Crane Clan newsletter and Dragon Clan players got a Dragon Clan newsletter. And they didn't even cover the same events. They would sometimes cover the same events from two different points of view, and they would other times cover different events. So you had to talk to other people to find out what was going on in the game, because even though they would fictionalize it, they would tell the story of Bayushi Kachiko, using the Egg of Panku, seducing Doji Oturi, creating a clone of him and sending him out to dishonor the Crane Clan. The actual what happened at a game store in a tournament was all oral tradition. And that's something they decided very early on. They said, we're never going to write this all down. It's going to be up to the fans to keep track of how the tournaments affect the story. The story is all going to be in snippets and pieces. It's not going to be official. So I've often gone on to say that Legend of the Five Rings is the best story in gaming. And people think I mean the books. They would release novels set in the L5R universe. I've never read any of them, or they think I mean the role-playing game. And I played the role-playing game once, I think. Apart from those things, my engagement with L5R is purely the collectible card game. It was the card game, the story of the card game that hooked us, because we believed in this stuff. We believed in, like I said, that we believed in the reality of the secondary world. We believed in that promise from AEG that we were going to get to control the story, and it would have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Lots of stuff they factored in, like they released a box set, which was the Learn How to Play L5R box set, and they had a storyline tournament before that where the winners of that tournament, the two people that made it to the final round, their clans would determine what clans were in the box set. So the battle at Baden Pass features the Dragon Clan versus the Crab Clan. One of the things the Crab Clan reminds me of, the Crab Clan were the great defenders of the empire. They manned the walls of Otosan Uchi, the four walls surrounding the city of the emperor. And the reason that makes me smile is I remember at a local tournament, my friend Dave was playing. My friend Dave and I, a whole bunch of us, were all playing in the same tournament. And I watched my friend Dave at another table playing this game, and he just turned and looked over at me and pointed to the dude across from him and mouthed, "This is amazing." And I'm like, what is happening over there? And when my game wrapped up, I probably lost. I went over and I watched Dave's game play out, and Dave turned to me and he goes, "This guy is trying to rebuild the walls of Otosan Uchi." And I'm like, what? Because one of the cool things about Legend of the Five Rings was there were lots of different ways to win. The core game had several different victory conditions, including getting to 40 honor, destroying all your opponent's provinces, all their regions that they controlled, or playing all five rings in the name Legend of the Five Rings. Well, those were in the rules. Those victory conditions were in the rules. They would release cards that had their own victory conditions, each one of which supported some element of the story. So, for instance, this Crab Clan player, after a great battle that happened in the story of the game where the walls of the Emperor's city had been breached, this Crab Clan player is trying to play the north, east, south, and west walls of Otosan Uchi. If he can play those four cards and then play this card, he wins. He plays a card and he wins. And we all loved that. We loved the fact that there were lots of crazy different victory conditions. And my friend Dave, who, he really, playing in this tournament meant a lot to him. And he was about to lose and he knew it. But he was completely blown away. He loved watching this guy trying to do this impossible task and succeed. And so Dave's attitude was, I'm going to lose, but I'm going to see something amazing happen. One of the victory conditions in Legend of the Five Rings that came out as a result of a card was the Darkest Magics. And if that title rings a bell, it's because a lot of the bones of the story, I don't think, none of us knew this while we were playing it, I think, because it was so spread out. And you're talking about a game that is way more complex than something like Game of Thrones, because there are hundreds of characters in the 3 years this game was out, each character represented by a card, and there would be an experienced version of the card, so that as this character's story advanced, there would now be Doji Hoturi and experienced Doji Hoturi. And you would have to figure out what happened in the story to change this character into this character. A lot of the bones of this story came from a movie that would later become one of my favorite movies, Big Trouble in Little China. The Darkest Magics is a quote from that movie.
The darkest magic.
The bad guy from that movie is basically the bad guy in L5R. The Darkest Magics was a card, this is what it looks like, that said if you played all 7 black scrolls, which was the number of black scrolls in the game at the time, you win. So people would build decks expressly to do this, and when you saw them doing it, it was amazing. It was hard to do. They were not often efficient decks, but they were not competitive. They were often not competitive decks by any stretch of the imagination. However, those few times when you were able to do it, it was so satisfying, right? You were able to effectively set your own difficulty level and play a competitive game at an arbitrarily high difficulty level on purpose just because you wanted the satisfaction of doing something incredibly difficult. Well, in order to understand why this is cool, you need to know what the black scrolls are. The black scrolls were the tools used to bind and constrain Fu Leng, the enemy of the game. And this is where you can kind of tell that it's not by any means strictly Japanese. It's a white guy's idea about what's cool about fantasy Japan, because some of these syllables do not exist anywhere in Japanese language. It's borrowing from Chinese mythology and all sorts of stuff.
There's Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoist alchemy and sorcery. We take what we want and leave the rest.
Which actually is another line, I think, from Big Trouble in Little China. Fu Leng is one of the 9 kami. He's one of the gods that created the world, and he's the evil one who was cursed and sent to Earth, and he's kind of the Sauron figure of Legend of the Five Rings, and he was bound by the 12 black scrolls. And the game sort of begins, a couple of different events lead to the beginning of the game happening, including one of them being a bad guy, or it might have been even I don't know, right? This is one of the problems of this, relaying the story of this game. Someone, a Shugenja, a wizard, reading the first black scroll and beginning the process of inadvertently releasing Fu Leng. Well, the interesting thing about this is there were more than 7 black scrolls. Fu Leng was bound by 12 black scrolls, but at this point in the game, there were only 7 available. Because over the course of the game, as players in tournaments would use the black scrolls to win, the characters that they attached those scrolls to would then later become corrupted by the Shadowlands magic. It's almost like radiation. They would be poisoned by this radiation, and they would become fallen versions of the same characters. All of this story stuff playing out as a result of what happened in tournaments. I remember discovering that the 12th black scroll had been opened when I saw this card in the game, and it completely blew my mind because it shows like a little thermonuclear explosion happening, and this also is wrapped up in the story. There's a point in the game where Togashi Yokuni, who has been the Dragon Clan champion, the Dragon Clan are I don't even know how to describe the Dragon Clan, like the Phoenix Clan were the wizards, but the Dragon Clan were the keeper of mysteries is maybe a good way of putting it. They were often a clan of monks. Togashi Yokuni, who was the Dragon Clan champion, revealed himself after, 2 years of playing this game to be, you'd open up a deck of cards and you go, oh, there's a new experience version of Togashi Yokuni, except he's not called Togashi Yokuni anymore. He's just called Togashi. And now it says he's this, that, and the other thing, and he's a kami. And you're like, wait, hang on. What? You mean this whole time? This character in the game, Togashi Yokuni, the head of the Dragon Clan, isn't just the head of the Dragon Clan. He is actually one of the gods that created the Earth, and he has been in hiding in this clan for the last 1,000 years, waiting for Fu Leng to try to rise again, because he, another god, another kami, is going to try and stop Fu Leng. That's his destiny. You're like, what is going on in this game? And as the story played out and you got more cards and you discovered what had happened at various tournaments, you learn that Mirumoto Hitomi, using the Obsidian Hand, which Bayushi Kachiko had put on her at the Battle of Baden Pass, where she and Hida Yakumo fought, and there's this great classic confrontation between these two characters that would end up very early in the history of the game, would end up paying off at the end of the game, where after Yakumo cuts off Mirumoto Hitomi's hand, Bayushi Kachiko gives her the Obsidian Hand, which she then has to use to kill the kami of her own clan, Togashi, in order to, this is her destiny, this is her fate, this is what she had to do at the Seven Thunders battle, the last battle against Fu Leng. She reaches into the corpse of the god, one of the gods that created the world, now made mortal, killed by Fu Leng, and pulls out the 12th black scroll from the heart of Togashi Yokuni and reads it, thereby affecting Fu Leng's, ascent to power, but also, again, this is being ripped off from Big Trouble in Little China, making Fu Leng mortal. I mean, I haven't even talked about, this is already crazy complex, and I haven't talked about 1/100th of all the crazy stuff that happened in this game, including like who is the hooded Ronin and what's going to happen to Toturi's army, and is Toturi also the hooded Ronin? You know, over the course of this game, there originally were 6 clans, technically 7, but one of them, the Scorpion clan, had already fallen. So there were this was crazy. There were Scorpion clan cards in the game that other clans could play, the idea being that you are, you know, allying yourself with this fallen clan, but there was no Scorpion clan stronghold. Strongholds were cards you began the game with that kind of determined what faction are you playing and what are your basic special abilities. But then eventually they released, because of things that happened in the game, they released a Scorpion clan stronghold, and they would just create new clans. By the time, only 2 years went by the time we had the Day of Thunder at Gen Con 1997, which I was at, there were like 12 different clans, including the Mantis clan, which was led by, oh God, what was that guy's name? It was, I refuse to look this up. I am going to remember this because he had a great shirt. The Mantis clan, Yoritomo. It was Yoritomo because it was originally Yoritomo's alliance, an alliance of all these minor clans under the banner of the Mantis clan, led by this guy named Yoritomo. And Yoritomo he wasn't the greatest duelist in the Empire. He wasn't the greatest samurai. In fact, I don't think he was a samurai, but he was the greatest sheer warrior. He was the most dogged and relentless. He's kind of like Wolverine in that respect, right? And he, under his banner, gathered all these minor clans and demanded they be recognized as a great clan. And I'll never forget him because he had the shirt, the Mantis clan shirt had a picture of Yoritomo on it, and underneath, the quote was from Doji Hoturi, the greatest duelist of the Empire, and it said, "I knew no fear until I saw the Son of Storms." And, you know, 27-year-old me was like, that's badass. What is going on with this game? Eventually, the bad guy got his own clan, Shadowlands, led by Yogo Junzo, who was a Scorpion clan wizard, I believe. And the Shadowlands are this evil, it's like Mordor, basically. And I remember my friend Austin loved the Shadowlands, and he had an incredibly competitive Shadowlands deck, I thought. I started off as a Crane clan player because I liked the fact that they were samurai and diplomats. I thought that was cool. But eventually they came out with a monk clan, a clan of just unaligned monks, the Shintao monks. And I remember the quote was, "Armed only with wisdom, the Shintao monks fight against the darkness." And they were like the keepers of the lore. They were the keepers of the prophecy. And the leader of their clan, Shinsei, was the guy who ultimately turned out to be the Hooded Ronin, by the way, was the guy who was going to point out, identify the reincarnated Seven Thunders. And that was a big part of the plot of the game, trying to figure out who were the Seven Thunders going to be. You knew who the champions of each clan were because it said so, and you knew that Fu Leng could only be defeated by the Seven Thunders, and most people assumed that the clan champions were going to be the clan Thunders, but built into that assumption was the possibility that they might not be. And for instance, the Scorpion clan champion, Bayushi Shoju, who ended up being undead, that guy can't be the Thunder. And in fact, it was the Hooded Ronin, it was Shinsei's job to point out that ultimately, and you discovered this by opening up cards, unless you played at the tournaments in which these things were decided, you opened up a pack of cards and there was a new experienced version of Bayushi Kachiko that said that she was the Scorpion clan Thunder. And you're like, the seductress, the evil seductress is one of the people that's going to defeat Fu Leng. And it's like, yeah, because as it turns out, she's not evil in what you would consider the traditional sense. She's just fulfilling her destiny. In fact, one of the first things that happens in the story of the clan war is Togashi, the god, as it turns out, even though everyone thought that he was a mortal, it was like he was basically the Highlander. He was an immortal, but he used different identities every 30 years or so that people thought it was a different person. Togashi tells Bayushi Kachiko that it's up to her to save the empire because it's her duty, it's her responsibility to poison the emperor. She has to do all this stuff in order to affect the outcome of the prophecy. She has her part to play just like everybody else. In fact, my monk deck was there's somewhere on Usenet, there's a post about this where people were, as the Day of Thunder approached, as the end of the story approached, the known and popular competitive players from each clan, people were sort of taking bets on who was going to win. And on Usenet, people were pledging their own stuff if their champion won. They would say, if Chris Bergstrom wins for the Lion Clan, I will donate to him and one of the things you could do is you could send in your box tops and you could get like a legit katana. They would send you a samurai sword, among other things, and all sorts of stuff you could send away for. And there was a post somewhere which says, if Matt Colville wins as a monk player, I will donate my blah, blah, blah. I don't remember what it was, because my monk deck was, by some people, and this is a much smaller, more fragmented internet than we have now, was considered as close as you could get to winning this with the stupid clan, because the way the monks would win was by enlightenment. They had to play anyone could win that way, but the monks were kind of engineered to win by enlightenment. There were 5 rings and there were 5 different monks, each one of which had a condition that if you fulfilled, you just got to play the ring. Otherwise, playing the Ring of Fire would require you to do some impossible thing, like you had to win a duel against an opponent who began the duel with a higher honor than you, and therefore, like, you have to start at a disadvantage and somehow come out ahead. So each ring was about mastery of a different element of the game, including like battle and spellcasting. And I was at the Day of Thunder. This was the beginning of my career as a game developer. I was the net rep, the internet representative, which is basically like a social media manager in 1995, 96 for a collectible card game called Dune, licensed from the Herbert estate, based on the Dune property, maybe my favorite novel of all time, up until I think right now, like 1Q84 is probably my favorite book, but for decades, Dune was my favorite book. I was incredibly lucky to get to work on the card game. My original job was just the person responsible for answering people's questions, because these games, like I said, were so complex. There was no way one person could hold the whole thing in your head. And I would just go online every day and make sure that if you were on any of the official forums, there's like one Usenet forum, there's a website, and you were asking questions about how this game worked, that I would answer it. And that got me in the door. And eventually I became a designer. I became an employee. I'm working at Last Unicorn Games. Last Unicorn was sort of a sister company to the guys that made Legend of the Five Rings, both in Orange County. Their owners were friends, both in Southern California. Their owners were friends. And so this was going to be my first Gen Con. 1997 was going to be my first Gen Con, and I wanted to go to the Day of Thunder. So my boss said, "Hey, are you available to help work the booth that weekend?" And I said, absolutely. They're going to fly me out there, get me a hotel room, get me a badge. I didn't have to do anything. I said, absolutely. I'm 100% down. I just want to be there for this one tournament. It's just one tournament. It's going to be like 6 hours over a 4-day weekend. It's the only thing that matters to me. And my boss, Christian, bless him, said, "Matt, absolutely. You can go to the tournament. We want you to go. We know it's important to you." Unfortunately, the folks that ran the show at the booth that year at Last Unicorn Games, the day before the Day of Thunder, all went out and got completely blasted. And so I was literally the only person at the booth. And I stood my post. I did my duty. I did not abandon, even though I was the junior guy and the owners were supposed to be there. I said, no, I'm going to stay here and work the booth and sell books and do the thing, while I hear across the hall, somewhere around 300 people all screaming and yelling, playing the final battle of Legend of the Five Rings. So it's a bittersweet story for me, because I was kind of heartbroken that I didn't get to see it. But the story of what happened in this final battle is emblematic of everything that happened in this game. And if you've stuck with the video this far, congratulations, because this is the best part. The finale, the Day of Thunder, was when a whole bunch of crazy stuff happened. All of which, because none of this was ever written down, it's all oral tradition. I spent a lot of time actually researching for this video and coming up short, because that era of the web is largely gone. Even the Wayback Machine couldn't help me. And like I said, they wrote down the story of what happened as a wiki. You can go to the wiki, the L5R wiki, and read all this stuff, but it's a horrible mess. And they take all the prequel stuff and the history of it, and they weave it all together into one big story that, like I said, is super messy. But what we really should have is the story of the game as it was played and how it changed expansion by expansion. Instead of what you get if you go look up any of these characters, where it starts with, their great grandfather and the feud between them and all this stuff, and generations and generations of conflict and story, all of which came after the Day of Thunder in novels and expansions and stuff like that. But nowhere is written down how the game was actually played and the actual story as we were experiencing it in the trenches. So I don't know everything that happened. I wasn't there. And some of these things passed on in the legend. For instance, one of the things that happened over the course of the game was the Naga were awakened. The Naga were initially thought to be mythical, but because of the return of Fu Lang, they were awoken in the swamp, and they do not belong to the Empire. They're their own culture. They're their own thing. They became their own faction, these awesome snake men. And there was a point early on in the brackets leading to the final round in the Day of Thunder tournament where the only two Naga player end up facing each other, which is a downer for Naga players, because if you only have two people representing your faction in a tournament and they meet early on, that means only one of them can proceed. You've reduced your chances of winning the tournament by half as a result. And the two Naga players got together and they said to each other, the players said, listen, this isn't our war. War is a human notion. Naga do not fight, do not have factions, do not have clans, do not fight amongst each other. So why should we fight? This is foolish. And what the players proposed to each other was that they would play the game for 6 rounds. They wouldn't attack each other. At the end of 6 rounds, whoever had mustered the largest army would win. And they went to the folks organizing the tournament, the guys who owned the game and who had designed it. They went to the designers of the game and they said, what do you guys think of this? And the designers put their heads together and they said, well, if all players at the tournament in play, and if all players in that game agree, you guys can do whatever you want. And so they said, great, that's exactly what we're going to do. And that ended up being important later on. Stay tuned. I think it was ChessX, a famous distributor, who was at the show, and they were offering a bounty, some amount of money in game product to anyone who made it to like the final 12, who would be willing to convert and betray their clan and reveal themselves as a Shadowlands player. And I believe one of the Phoenix players actually did this, sat down to play against another player and took off his Phoenix t-shirt, and there was a Shadowlands shirt under it, and he switched decks at the last minute. Of course he lost, but who cares? That's not the dramatic part. The dramatic part was that he switched sides, and I thought that kind of stuff was amazing. This Gen Con, by the way, 1997, was the first time I ever saw cosplayers. This is 20 years ago, and cosplay wasn't really a thing yet, but people were really into it. You'd see people walking around the show with the mon, right? The flag of their clan over them, and they were dressed up in samurai garb. Lots of girls were dressing up as Bayushi Kachiko. And it was this crazy phenomenon that showed me that there was a lot more. People were super, super invested in this. It's not unusual now for people to cosplay as their famous characters. It was then. So that gives you some idea of how much they loved these characters. People identified with these characters incredibly strongly because the world of L5R was nothing like the world of Game of Thrones. It was all about honor and romance and unrequited love and betrayals. And it was the tagline was a world where honor is stronger than steel. And it really was about, bowing to your enemy. And at one point, Moritomo bows to the clans, bringing an army and saying, I offer you my head. My army is going to attack you and they're going to lose. But I am showing you that we are honorable, we minor clans, that we deserve a place among you. And in doing that, in bowing to his enemies, he earned the right, basically presenting his head, giving them the opportunity to kill him. He earned the right to become a great clan. This is all woven into not only the story, but the gameplay. During this final tournament, the Day of Thunder Gen Con 1997, as all this crazy stuff is happening, the story guy for L5R, a guy named John Wick, that's his real name, and he's had that name a lot longer than Keanu Reeves has. John showed up. He wasn't the designer of the game. That was a guy named Dave Williams. And John Zinzer, I think it was his world. It was his Fantasy Japan world. John's job was when an artist who was given the brief, hey, draw a lion samurai, would draw a lion samurai and send it in as part of his job. That was, making a new card. It was John, a designer would say, okay, here are this guy's stats. John would say, let me tell you who this guy is. That had a big impact on me. It's one of the reasons I think Evolve's characters turned out as good as they were. Whatever else you think about that game, I think it had amazing characters because the artists would work on these guys. And then I would say, no. That guy's not a space marine. He's a orbital welder. And I would come up with a story for him just based on the art. Well, that was basically John's job. John shows up at the Day of Thunder with 12 manila envelopes, each one marked with the symbol of a clan on it, of the 12 different clans. And every time one clan, including mine, the monk, was eliminated from the game, he would take that manila envelope, which contained the ending of the story, if that clan won, and he burned it. So no one would ever know what would have happened if the monks had won at the Day of Thunder, or if the Phoenix clan had won, or if the Dragon clan had won. As each clan was eliminated, their ending was destroyed. Until eventually the final 2 clans who faced each other were my original clan, the Crane clan, and the Lion clan. And this is how it should have been. Again, with the Churchill quote from the Marne, no intelligence placed these players in the final round. The game was designed maybe to give the Lion Clan and the Crane Clan a bit of an advantage over the other ones because the designers wanted a certain outcome, but they were not in control of the outcome. Anybody could have won. The Lion Clan champion, who was the fallen samurai Akodo Toturi, now known only as Toturi, and the Crane Clan champion, Doji Toturi, were best friends when they were children. And their friendship is interwoven into the conflict between their clans and the clan war. And when these two players met, the winner of the idea was the winner of the tournament gets to kill Fu Lang and become the next emperor and save the world. Unless, of course, the winner of the tournament was the Shadowlands. And these two players, probably informed by what the Naga players had done, said, listen, we're best friends. Our characters are best friends. We shouldn't compete to see who gets to kill Fu Lang because that is not honorable. Instead, we will duel, and the winner gets to sacrifice their life to kill Fu Lang, and the loser becomes the next emperor. This is not something anybody had planned on, but they went to the designers and they got their heads together and they said, yeah, that sounds cool to us. And they played, and one side won. And John Wick, who would later become a good friend of mine, we used to play games together at Last Unicorn Games. He took the last two manila envelopes, the Lion Clan ending and the Crane Clan ending, and he burned both of them. And then he extemporaneously told the story of the battle at the palace where the Thunders got together and each did their part and each played their role until eventually it was these two best friends and Fu Lang, and which one of them won and which one of them died and which one of them went on to become the emperor, which I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to spoil for you, but it probably doesn't mean anything for you because you weren't there. I don't know. That's it, by the way. That's the story. I don't know why other game companies don't do this. I've often looked at games like League of Legends, which have characters that have backstories, that have conflicts. I remember playing Renekton, this alligator dude, and he had this one-off line of dialogue that I had never heard before. And I think you only hear it if this other character, Nasus, the dog-headed Anubis-looking dude, is in the game with you, opposing you, where Renekton says, "Nasus cannot escape me forever." And I was like, whoa, what is happening? It turns out that they're brothers and they're chasing each other through the dimensions, one seeking justice against the other. I'm like, this is amazing. Why don't they do more stuff like this? Why don't they build the narrative conflict between these characters? They have a tournament every year. They have lots of tournaments, actually. They could change the characters over time based on, it could be purely visual, change the characters over time based on what people in the game do. There are lots of games that could do this and don't, and it's always kind of let me down because I've never seen any game ever with anywhere near the level of player engagement that folks playing L5R between 1995 and 1997 had with that game. We loved that game. We loved the story of it. We identified with our clans. We wore their t-shirt. We read their stories. We adopted their attitudes. And of course, it should come as no surprise, I spoiled it earlier, that they didn't end the game. A game about honor. They sort of betrayed their players and they lost a lot of players. And I'm not sure the game ever really recovered from that. Because again, these were the stakes. The idea that this was the end was built into the drama of the game. It's what made the drama meaningful. But in their defense, these guys had seen this game just rise and rise and rise in popularity, and they knew it could become more popular. It could become a lot more popular. They wanted to bring you've never seen a Legend of the Five Rings cartoon or movie, but at the time, it seemed like there was definitely going to be one. There had to be one. Look how popular this game was. They would go on to release more expansions. I believe the first expansion after the Day of Thunder was the Scorpion Clan Coup, which was a prequel, which made the game even more confusing, right? Because now trying to explain the game to a newcomer, there was all this, timeline stuff you had to worry about. It's one of the things that makes the wiki impossible to read because they try to build all the narrative story stuff in instead of telling the story of the game as it occurred over these tournaments. And people would keep playing. My friends and I would dip into it over time. It was a very complex game. It was not well suited for multiplayer. It was never well suited for multiplayer play. A lot of collectible card games are not. No idea why. I've always sort of felt like an outsider in the realm of games that are for people that only have one friend, right? Where it's like 2-player games and that's it. And where there's no way to add more players. My friends and I kludged together our own rules for multiplayer L5R, but it wasn't designed for it. And even though we spent a lot of time and money and effort on it, it was always a very frustrating game to play multiplayer. It had a kind of winner take all attitude toward battles that I think harmed it somewhat. In spite of the fact that we kept playing it was never the same after that. And I think everybody felt that way. And they have often gone back. They just released a new version of L5R. Fantasy Flight bought the game in 2015. So this game started in 1995. It was still going 20 years later. Fantasy Flight bought the game from AEG a couple of years ago. They just released a new 2-player version of the game. I'm sure the people who love the game a lot think that it is quintessentially a duel, a 2-player game, and that's fine. All I want is some nice optional rules that allow us to play it with our friends together at the table. And a lot of people online are like, oh, are you interested in the new L5R game? And I'm vaguely interested in it. I'd be more interested in it if I could bring it to game night and say, hey, we're going to play this, but I can't because they made it 2 players. But while I am interested in it in a vague kind of spectator way, it's never going to be the same. No group I'm going to play with this game with is ever going, no one I ever play games with is ever going to get into any game story as much as we all got into that story. No video game can compete. I'm not even sure. Sometimes I think that it's up to me. It's like Adventure Lookup I'd been talking about for years and saying we need it. Nobody made one. People didn't even agree it was a good idea. And then finally I said, well, if no one else is going to do it, it's up to me. And now Adventure Lookup is a huge hit. If you're a dungeon master and you're looking for an adventure, www.adventurelookup.com. It's completely free. It doesn't have adventures in it. It just tells you they exist and which one is the right one for you. And then you can go find it. So maybe this L5R thing, like no one else is trying it, maybe because no one else is still making games from back then. I don't know. I don't know why we've never seen a game like this. But maybe it's because the game store ecology was such an important part of this. It's not really something I think you could do sitting at your computer. You have to get together at a game store with other players and see, and everyone's hearing and telling the stories about what is happening in play. I think you probably could do it. I think you probably could do it at a computer because now we have Twitch and everybody can stream stuff, right? So now it's like everyone is a game store in the sense that anything that could happen at a game store tournament now can happen online on Twitch. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's a new technological revolution was necessary in order to get a new artistic revolution. The game store ecology definitely had a lot to do with it, and that ecology has largely collapsed compared to the 1990s. There are still game stores. There are just many, many fewer of them now than there used to be. But in my experience, they're all way, way better now. That's what I mean when I say the greatest story in gaming. It's that level of player engagement. It's the fact that it was never written down. It was oral tradition. You had to talk to people who had played at tournaments or go online, go onto Usenet, right? It would be a lot easier to record all this stuff now. Because of the web and Twitch, and making it easier to record the story as it was happening during play might make the story less interesting because it would be so, having to talk to people, reinforcing the power of the network. The network of players was forged by having to talk to other people about what the hell was going on in this game. Making that information trivially easy to get devalues it. So maybe it can't be repeated. But I was there. I didn't get to attend the tournament, but I was at the convention. I was a player. I was a semi-competitive monk player. And as an epilogue to this story, I got to play at a tournament at a convention that was actually, it was a games university, I think they called it. They only did 1 or 2 of these, but I believe AEG sponsored this entire tournament, this entire convention. And while I was at this convention, they had a crazy version of L5R. And this is what I meant earlier in this video when I said there are some games that you can only play at a convention because of the size and scale and scope of them. And this is one of them. It was an L5R game, and it was kind of like Diplomacy in that there was a room at the convention, like a suite, where there was a board set up, the map of Fantasy Japan, Rokugan. The map of Rokugan was set up, and there were 7 players, each player representing one of the great houses, and each player had 3 armies on the board, which is also the number you start with in Diplomacy. And like I said, you're basically playing Diplomacy, or you're issuing orders to your units saying this unit's going to move here and this unit's going to move here. And that could result in combat. And you were a daimyo of your clan, and you could treat with the other daimyos and make allegiances and alliances. But when you issued an order to one of your units, each unit on the board was represented by a player in the ballroom with a deck of cards. So I, the daimyo, I don't remember which clan I was picking. It might have been the Crane clan. I, the daimyo for the Crane clan, had 3 armies on the board. That represented 3 actual players who were effectively working for me. They're out in the ballroom awaiting orders. And then there are generals, right? Shoguns out in the field. The daimyo playing diplomacy. So 3 shoguns, 1 daimyo. And then there was a runner whose name I don't remember, whose job it was to take my orders and deliver them to the generals. And the problem was the generals had their own copies of the map, and the generals didn't have to obey your orders. They could move where they wanted to and engage and fight other armies, and then they would play a game of L5R, and whoever won the game of L5R won the battle for that tournament. And it was fantastic. I've never played a game like this where it's actually does a really good job of simulating what something like World War I was. Before we had satellites and reconnaissance and instantaneous communication. There was some of this in World War I, but it hadn't come into its own yet. You would issue orders based on what you knew. We just made an alliance. Me and this other player just made an alliance. And the runner would go to issue the order, and the general would say something like, no, you haven't. That guy's lying to you. I know, because I just saw his army move over here. So I'm going to do what I have to do. And I'm going to attack that guy. I'm going to disobey your orders. But I was the player as the daimyo with all the information. So sometimes the generals would make decisions based on outdated knowledge. And it was fascinating. It was the kind of thing, again, it took a lot of players. Obviously, it's 7 times 5, 35 players to play this game. But I would play a game like that again in a heartbeat. However, they couldn't manufacture this game because you need 35 people to play it. That's it, folks. That's the greatest story in gaming. And one of the reasons I made this video is because I'm sure everyone's going to have their own idea about what their favorite story in games is, as they should. That's something that should be personal and idiosyncratic. I hope I've made my case for why The Legend of the Five Rings story was different from other game stories. But one of the reasons I made this was because I just didn't want that story to die. I wanted it to be known. I wanted it to be out there. And I don't think it's possible now to reconstruct the history of the Clan War in terms of game releases, tournaments, and how the story was informed by those things and what we knew as we played it. Not what the wiki says, what the omniscient narrator view from the beginning of time, but what we, the players, knew as the game was unfolding before us. That's what I would like to see reconstructed. Unfortunately, I think most of that information is lost now. And again, I think that makes it more valuable. I'd been thinking about making a video on the subject for a long time. I decided to make it now, by the way, because I went on Twitter. I had a couple of ideas for videos. I thought we might talk about initiative in D&D and how and when exactly you decide when it's time to roll initiative and how that can be a dramatic tool in your arsenal. And I said, do we want to see I went to Twitter and made a poll. Do you guys want to see a video on initiative? Do you want to see a video on Blade Runner 2049? I have a couple things to say about that. Blade Runner 1982 was one of my, I guess Blade Runner 2019, the first movie, one of my favorite movies, was my favorite movie for many, many years. Or do you guys want to see a video on the greatest story in gaming? So if you don't like this video and you would wish I had done another one, you should be following me on Twitter at Matt Colville, where then you can get to vote on what I do next. I don't always obey the vote. Sometimes I just decide, screw it, I'm going to make the video I want to make. It's my hope that a week from basically now, next Monday, the 23rd, that our Strongholds and Followers Kickstarter will start. It's also the Kickstarter for funding our stream. If you want to be alerted when that Kickstarter goes live, I have to assume that most people watching this video are going to find out when the Kickstarter goes live, because I'll make a video about it and I'll be on Twitter. But if you don't want to miss it, then follow the link to MCDM Productions and the doobly-doo. So fill out a form. It's just your email. And I swear on my mother's grave, we will only ever use this email once to email you when the Kickstarter is live. We will not sell your email to anybody. I don't know why we would do that. But you give us your email and we will alert you when the Kickstarter Stronghold goes live. Otherwise, I'm not sure what the next video is going to be. Maybe that's up to you folks. Until then, that's the end of my turn in L5R. Therefore, I bow and the table is yours.